Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
When you're negotiating with Iran of the president, to what extent are American financial statements motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about American financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all. That's the only thing that matters.
Well, that was Donald Trump. We're going to talk about that in a moment. We have Nate Soares on the show today. We'll chat with Nate in just a little while. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So let's break that down. There's so many other ways he could have said that answer, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to throw one out there. Look, I think about Americans' economic struggle obsessively, night and day. It is the first and most important thing on my mind when I wake up and when I go to sleep at night. At the same time, I also worry about the nuclear threat against America, not just from Iran, but anywhere in the world. Russia, China, wherever. These are not mutually exclusive problems. See how that went, kids? See how easy that was?
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy. No, Democrats are going to be like, damn, we can't cut that up for ads for the midterms. Like, could you imagine what Democrats are doing right now with that quote? I really don't give a flying fuck about Americans or their financial problems. And he's doubled and tripled down in the days since.
Well, this is why his numbers are lower than any modern president or any president since we've kept track of this.
Yeah. I am going to hope that a fair amount of Americans heard that and were like, okay, I'm done with this dude. I'm done with this dude. And I'm done with Congress, that Republican Congress that supports him and enables him. Like, that's why the polling is what it is, because people, I think, are realizing he does not care.
He really doesn't care. And there was one senator who defected. Mm-hmm. So it is very possible that this inept, selfish group may actually get a spine.
Well, look, we know what happened with Biden. Biden and his team tried to tell everybody that the economy was great. And they didn't know how to nuance. They weren't able to find that sweet spot of, we know that the kitchen table is wrought with economic struggles right now. But here's where we're making improvement. But we know that it's not even close to where it needs to be. They didn't do that. This clown, it's like he's learned nothing from the last election. And they're all doing it again. Mm-hmm. The voters know what they're paying when they go fill up their tanks. The voters know what they're paying at the grocery store. They know what they're paying for their health care premiums. Like, they know. So it's like, not only are they not being helped, not only is he reneging on the promises he made, he's literally telling them, I don't give a fuck about you. Or at the same time, he's telling them everything's great. We have the greatest economy in the world. So it's about the voters at this point. It's up to them.
We hope they make the right decision.
Well, a lot of them are. A lot of them are. And I think to Jen's point, you're going to see a lot more defection in Congress because that party is terrified of what's coming in November.
You would think so, but there does still seem to be an incredible hold, much like a cult, on the House and the Senate. The defections are incredibly small compared to what one would anticipate when we just had inflation numbers, which are astronomical. Mm-hmm. And you would think that they'd be apoplectic and saying something. Yeah. A lot more than the small number that have.
We've said this a few times on this podcast that once we get through the primary season, I think you're going to see a lot more defections because part of the fear that Republicans in Congress have with Donald Trump is the fear of being primaried, of losing their jobs. So if they don't have that fear anymore, and they're 2 or 3 months away from the midterms, you might see them get a lot bolder and abandoning him in that sycophantic, fealty kind of way that they have now. But let's talk about redistricting, because I know Democrats are upset with what's happening with the Supreme Court, with all the southern states, the ruling that the court made with Virginia. But here's the thing. This thing could backfire big time. And so I'm going to give you 4 reasons that may make you less anxious. The first one is taking reliably red districts and carving them up shrinks the margins and could backfire in a wave election because the red districts become less reliable. The second thing is redrawing maps mid-decade instead of waiting for the new census data means that these maps are being drawn on old data. And we know from statistics that people move constantly during a decade. So Republicans really have no idea who they're shifting around now in these new maps. States like Florida and Texas, they've been riding a wave of Hispanic vote. And they're banking on the Hispanic population continuing to grow and support Trump and the Republicans, ignoring polling data of the last 6 to 12 months, which suggests otherwise. That's a potential huge backfire. And then the last reason is that redistricting this way, which has been done so quickly, so chaotically, is leaving Republican voters uncertain of which district they're in. So they may not know where to go. They may not know who to vote for. And that could piss them off to the point where they just say, fuck it. I stay home. And here's the thing. Given the statistics on turnout for midterm elections, where many folks stay home anyway, this could give a huge advantage to Democrats, whose voters, unlike the voters I just mentioned on the right, are so fired up to go vote in this midterm election. And that could be a huge backfire for Republicans. So take everything with a grain of salt. Be upset that what's happening. It's certainly horrible for what they've done to districts that either were or were going to be majority minority. It is an assault, a blatant, shameless assault on equal representation in the black community. And it's wrong. But it may backfire hugely. And if you look at the number of seats that were lost in the last 20 years in a midterm, you're talking 30, 40, 50, 60 seats. So this is typical of what happens in a midterm. Put all this shit on the table where voters are pissed off that they're being disenfranchised, voters are confused, voters they're banking on having as reliable aren't, where they're diluting their own reliable red districts. Just wait and see what happens. There's a lot of reason to expect that a lot of this shit may backfire.
It's nice to have optimistic Andy
I was
back.
going to say that.
He's
absolutely.
back. He's back.
Shady's
and
back.
He's in fuego, baby.
That was a lot of optimism, right?
Start me up. What else can I be optimistic on?
Well, that
The
was a
Knicks. The Knicks are going all the way, baby.
That might
lot.
happen.
Whatever you say.
I can definitely see a potential backfire.
I would say I'm not really in favor of the idea that there's a backlash. I think that we still could win just because people are so disillusioned by who they voted for if they voted for Trump, in that, America first, everything that he's done. And plus, we always talk about is the economy stupid. And the reality is everyone's gas is going up and it won't be down in November. And everything else is more expensive. So I think that's the reason. The redistricting, though, I really do go by what the Cook Political Report does. And they did an analysis of what's happening. And they said, of course, Democrats are still favored, but the favoring is far reduced because of the redistricting.
In a perfect world, if everything the Republicans did works out like a charm, they pick up high single digits to low double digits. Now, let's just take the worst case scenario. They pick up 12 seats, 13 seats because of redistricting. Based on statistics of turnout during the midterm elections and which party wins, which party loses, and by how much, given everything else that's happened in the last year, to your point, which has voters, Democrats fired up, given what we know about Trump losing independent voters, Hispanic voters, young men, he's even starting to lose part of his non-college white voters. With everything we know, we can't get into the teens ourselves. Forget 30, 40, 50. I mean, it seems that not only will we win, but that all of this gerrymandering bullshit on their part is going to be for naught. Let's get to the winners and the losers.
My winner Marty McCary for resigning as head of the FDA after Big Tobacco won a concession with fruit-flavored vapes. My loser, SCOTUS, who cleared the way for Alabama to use a new voting map which will eliminate one largely black district before the midterms and creates an opening for Republicans to gain a seat.
This week's winner has to be Chinese President Xi, who sent Trump home with nothing but humiliation. My loser is a personal one. It's my alma mater, NYU, for their passive-aggressive pick of Jonathan Haidt as the commencement speaker.
My winner, the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled yesterday in an emergency order that the abortion pill mifepristone could continue to be prescribed by telehealth and sent to patients by mail. My loser, Mike Johnson and all the Republicans who said Donald Trump didn't say what he actually said, what we actually heard him say about not giving a fuck about Americans' finances. And that gets us to the weekly rant. I am encouraged. You want to talk about optimistic Andy? I am encouraged by the reality that Donald Trump is losing an appreciable part of his base, which includes the constituencies I mentioned a moment ago. But still, too many Americans have remained loyal to the cult. I want to read something to you, which was a comment a Trump supporter made to one of my posts online this week. I had merely suggested to MAGA that this might be a good time to question how much of a brilliant businessman and negotiator Trump actually is, given that the economy is a disaster. Inflation is the highest in years. Grocery and gas prices are skyrocketing. Job growth is stagnant. He's stuck in Iran and can't get out, and has a history of business bankruptcies and fraud. And then a dude named Dave responded with, and I quote, "The economy is doing great, better than it was. The market is hitting all-time highs. Inflation is much lower than under Biden and will continue to drop. Gas prices are high, but will fall soon. They were high under Obama and even higher than now under Joe Biden for a longer period. Unemployment is at a 50-year low. Look it up. You just spew lies and expect others to accept them." Well, Dave, I'm actually spewing reality and facts, which I know is a terribly difficult concept for many in the cult to wrap their arms around, because cognitive dissonance is a bitch. For the record, the lowest unemployment rate over the past 50 years was 3.4%, achieved by President Joe Biden in January and April 2023. And when Biden left office, the inflation rate was 3%. It's 3.8% now. And while the highest gas under Biden was $5.01, it was $3.98 under Obama. And it's $4.60 now. The economy sucks. And the working class don't give a rat's ass about the stock market. So yeah, Dave, I looked it all up, and you're about 98% wrong. The unfortunate truth is, it's much easier for Trump supporters to continue supporting him as his presidency is imploding, because to admit Trump is a failure is to admit they were duped. And it's a lot easier to double down on the lies and the chaos and the failure than it is to admit you fucked up. Here's the thing, though, that I just don't understand with Dave's logic. MAGA voted for a guy who promised to fix all of Biden and Obama's problems. But as he's failing to do that, they simply point back to the problems of Biden and Obama and say, it was much worse then, instead of actually holding him accountable for his failure to deliver on his promises. So as they pay $4.60 a gallon for gas, as the price of their groceries skyrockets, as they failed to receive better and cheaper health insurance, as the America First president has them mired in a quagmire in Iran with no end in sight, as they're still waiting for half the Epstein files and the pedophile prosecutions, they deflect back to Biden and Obama and give Trump a free pass on his myriad broken promises and betrayals. But I'll finish with how I started. More and more Trump supporters are getting angry and fed up with his bullshit and with their economic struggles, which are solely due to his unforced errors. Because the truth is, there is absolutely nothing inherently fundamentally wrong with this economy except all the devastating shit Trump continues to single-handedly do to it, which is why he and his party will be punished mercilessly in November, despite their shameless redistricting games, which are going to backfire bigly. All right, let's get to Nate Soares. He is the president of the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. He has been working in the field for over a decade after previous experience at Microsoft and Google. He is the author of a large body of technical and semi-technical writing on AI alignment, including foundational work on value learning, decision theory, and power-seeking incentives in smarter-than-human AIs. And last year, with his co-author Eliezer Lukowski, he released the book, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies: Why Superhuman AI Would Kill Us. Nate, welcome into the back room.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about the book you co-wrote with Eliezer Lukowski last year, titled If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies: Why Superhuman AI Would Kill Us. That's about as stark and alarming as it gets. It conjures up the REM classic, It's the End of the World as We Know It. But in the subtitle, you chose the word would instead of will. So there's hope for us yet, isn't there?
That's right. The book title also starts with if.
Right. So tell us about the book and where you're at today with everything.
Yeah, from one perspective, it's a very simple argument, which is these companies are racing to create machines that are smarter than any human. That's their explicitly stated goal. And nobody knows what's going on inside these machines, not even the people who make them, can get into that. But they're basically growing smarter and smarter machines that nobody understands. And, that's sort of obviously a recipe for disaster. It's not that it must be a disaster. It's just that if you recklessly race to make machines radically smarter than any human, without knowing what you're doing, there's all sorts of ways for that to go wrong, and it probably will.
Mm-hmm.
I encountered some arguments that artificial intelligence was going to be the biggest game in town. I encountered these arguments over a decade ago. The world is shaped according to human beings more so than any other animal. And it's not because we can run the fastest. It's not because we have the sharpest claws. It's because we have the smartest brains. And if we create entities that are even smarter than us, then the world will be shaped according to their will, or according to what they're trying to do rather than ours. And so, I spent over a decade trying to figure out how to make AI good before the industry figures out how to make it smart. And most of that time I was trying to, work on the technical side of things, work on whiteboards, just try and solve some of the open problems and how you make the AIs behave well, even when they're much smarter than humans. And, that work went a lot slower than the AI industry did. Mm-hmm. And so I never sort of wanted to be here saying we have a problem, as opposed to being here saying, hey, I've solved this problem we were going to have. But we didn't solve it, and we do have a problem, and we are sort of on track for destruction. But that doesn't mean we're going to die. It just means we have to change course. And so that's what we're here trying to say.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people hear warnings about AI destroying humanity and think, what evidence or developments exist that make you believe this is a profound real-world threat rather than a lot of speculative hype?
Yeah, there's a number of pieces of that puzzle. One thing to say is that the machines are talking now. You can go just type questions into ChatGPT and it'll give you answers, and it does so. We can talk about how it's not quite as smart as some people wish it was, but this is remarkable progress over where we were 6 years ago. And 6 years ago, if you asked top computer scientists how long it would take for the machines to talk this well, they'd say, oh, that's going to be 50 years, if not 500 years, right? And so one of the big things I think people don't get about AI is that AI is a moving target. The sort of scary stuff is not where it is today, it's where it's going. And a lot of people have only seen ChatGPT as a phase of AI because they weren't paying attention to AI before then. And so they're like, oh, well, this ChatGPT stuff, it doesn't seem all that scary. There's all these ways that it sort of can't, couldn't cause damage if it tried. And that's true. But if you've been in AI since before ChatGPT, and you've sort of seen, other stuff, and then ChatGPT comes out of nowhere, and you're like, wow, this is a bunch more capable than we thought we were going to get in 50 or 500 years. Then you ask the question, what's the next jump? What's the next thing that comes out of nowhere and does 50 or 500 years of AI progress in a year? So that's one reason why it looks like the direction it's headed is scary. There's a whole bunch of other pieces of this puzzle of why, like, can the AIs actually get really smart? And if they did, why would they be dangerous? And can't humanity just turn them off? And can't we just make them do exactly what we say? And won't they only be able to do what we say because they're machines, right? And there's sort of a lot of, I could go into answering each of those in turn, but the very basic picture here is creating a machine superintelligences is the sort of thing that would impact the planet like the creation of Homo sapiens, right? It's the sort of thing that radically transforms the world. And we could have a conversation about why it's probably going to go poorly for us. It's sort of not because the AI would hate us. It's because the AI wouldn't care. Humans don't go around, humans aren't building guns to go to war with the chimpanzees. We're not like Skynet to the chimpanzees where we're like seeking them out and having this big battle and there's some plucky chimpanzee heroes who are like trying to save the day, right? We sort of don't care about the chimpanzees at all, and we're just taking their habitat. And if they live or die depends on whether or not we manage to restrain ourselves from taking their habitat. And that's the sort of position we would be in with regards to super intelligent machines if we create them.
I have to be honest, AI fucking terrifies me. I see the benefits and I use it a lot myself, but I also see how it's being misused and abused. The political deep fakes, for example, which can influence elections. Do you believe that we need massive regulation here of this technology?
There are a ton of issues that AI is creating. And also, as you say, a ton of benefits that AI is creating. I try to stay out of all of it except the part where I sort of say, hey, if we keep racing ahead on this super intelligent stuff with anything remotely like current techniques, it's just going to kill us all. Right. And that's not because that's the only issue, right? It's not because we don't have other issues, right? It could be that AI will cause, big disruption and bad disruption in the political ecosystem. It could be that AIs will, before they get smart enough and capable enough to act on their own, it could be that they'll help misanthropic humans make plagues that are horribly dangerous, right? It could be that, robotic weapons are used by dictators to sort of suppress their populations in a way that like more brutally than a military could. And those are all sort of issues that humanity is going to need to deal with. On the flip side, there's also benefits to getting more information to people and to having it be robots rather than humans on the front lines of war, right? And there's these are sort of complicated issues, but they're sort of normal technological issues. And I think humanity needs to be grappling with them. And I'm sort of here saying, I don't know the solution to those. I'm just sort of trying to say also, if we keep racing on making these smarter than human machines, they're not going to stay on your leash and they're just going to kill us all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the way I look at it is like, there's always been this fear of technology and technological advancement. Oh, this is going to kill us. This is going to do this. This is going to do that. And lo and behold, it doesn't. And it actually makes our lives better in most ways. Something just feels a little different here. Like we've never really had to grapple with a technology changing reality, right? Like what's real now and what's fake? That is seemingly uncharted territory.
Yeah. I think it's, I definitely have some sympathy for people who say, hey, everyone worries about technology and it always turns out good. And I think there's a lot of technologies that humanity probably should have been more gung-ho about. I think nuclear energy probably would have killed a lot less people than the sort of coal dust in people's lungs. I think the FDA probably kills more people by drugs not released and people not being able to get medicines for drugs that were never created or never released, then they save via preventing, and so I think that on balance, humanity is sort of often bad at weighing the benefits and the risks from technology. But as you say, I think AI is different, and there's a couple of ways it's different. One thing I'd say first is that the history of technology is not that it's actually always good. There were people warning that leaded gasoline, while it might make cars engines run a little bit smoother, there were scientists who warned, hey, this leaded gasoline stuff might poison a lot of kids. It might cause a lot of mental damage to a lot of people when there's leaded gasoline fumes everywhere. And the industry did these big campaigns to sort of say, oh no, the leaded gasoline is perfectly safe. We'll show how safe it is by washing our hands with it, and then they get lead poisoning, but they don't televise that part, right? And we just went ahead and put the lead in the gasoline, and this went ahead and caused brain damage to hundreds of millions of kids around the world. And then we said, oops, and we took the lead out of the gasoline, right? And people said, oh, the nuclear weapons, they're gonna cause a nuclear apocalypse, and that's gonna kill us all. And the nuclear apocalypse didn't happen, or at least it hasn't happened yet. But it's not because the nukes were fake. The thing to learn from the fact that the bombs didn't fly is not oh, I guess it was all hype. Oh, I guess the scientists were just being negative Nancy's and sounding an alarm on a fake risk. No, nuclear weapons are real. They can really level a city. The reason the bombs didn't fly is that people put in hard work to avoid that fate, right? And I'm not here saying AI is going to kill us all. I'm here saying this is another one of those cases where we've got to put in hard work to avoid the fate, which we've done before with cases like nuclear weapons. And the other really big reason that AI is different, there's what you say, where it starts to sort of distort people's perceptions of reality. But one of the really big ones is that if you screw up bad enough with AI, there's no second try. With leaded gasoline, we could put the lead in the gasoline and we poison, 100 million kids, and then we're like, oops. And you can't unpoison those kids, but you can take the lead out of the gasoline, and the next generation will be healthier, and you'll sort of see the crime rates drop in decades later. With AI, if you unleash a super intelligent machine, and there's some scientists saying, hey, that's going to kill us all, and others are saying, oh, don't listen to those guys. If the people saying don't listen to those guys are wrong this time, you can't take the super intelligent machine back out. If it kills us all, we're dead. Mm-hmm. There's no retries, and so it's a different issue.
What do you make of a company like Anthropic, who creates an AI model and then says, we shouldn't release this because it's basically too dangerous?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting and sort of strange culture around this stuff. A lot of the people at these AI companies, they don't believe they're making, just self-driving car drivers. They don't believe that they are just automating a couple white-collar jobs. They believe that they are creating, what's basically the machine god. In Silicon Valley, they call it the sand god, and they're like, oh, it's glib, it's tongue in cheek, but they're like, oh yeah, we're going to make the sand god, and it's going to, end aging, or whatever. And, I think it's maybe laudable to try and make a good sand god, but these guys, I don't think they have much chance of it. But it's, I think a lot of these people understand the potential power of what they're making, and I think a lot of them fear it a bit. Mm-hmm. There's water cooler conversations about whether it's more like 10% or 90% chance that it kills everybody on the planet, and they're like, oh, well, we got to keep going because if we don't, the next guy will.
Yeah.
They're sort of not trying to make consumer products. They're trying to make these super intelligent AIs. They talk about, a country worth of geniuses in a data center. They talk about super intelligence in the true sense of the word. That was OpenAI, not Anthropic. But, that's, I think when you see them make a model and say this is too dangerous to release, I think what you're seeing is that they're sort of, they are not thinking about the consumer products. The investors are thinking about consumer products. The people using it are thinking about consumer products, but they're thinking about these, super intelligent machines that will radically transform the world. And that's where they're shooting for.
Mm. So getting back to regulation for a second, do you think governments are capable of regulating AI effectively when it just seems like these lawmakers often struggle to understand even the basic aspects of the technology?
I think it's possible. It might be difficult, but there's a couple reasons for hope here. One is AI would be much easier to regulate than nuclear weapons. We're sort of not talking about like the sort of dangerous AIs, the frontier models. These are not ones that you can train on your laptop. Training these takes a data center that's roughly the size of a city, drawing roughly as much electricity as a city for the better part of a year. Right? They're not actually city sized yet, but they take these huge data centers with this huge amount of energy infrastructure, running for a long time, and the computer chips in these are highly advanced computer chips that are the peak output of this entire global supply chain that can sort of only be fabricated in Taiwan using a lithography machine that only exists in the Netherlands, using a bunch of components that can only be created in the USA, and by contrast, uranium is a rock that you dig out of the ground. And a centrifuge is much easier to build than an enormous data center, So it would be easier on paper to sort of say, hey, we're going to watch where the AI chips go, and we're going to require some international monitoring, and we're going to make sure that they're not being used to make these super intelligent machines, even as we continue to use them for this, that, or the other thing. That would take sort of, in some sense, less regulatory effort than the nuclear non-proliferation treaties. There's then a question of whether current lawmakers can notice that they need to be doing this and can sort of write the correct regulations that actually work on this matter. I think it's going to be difficult. I spend time in DC trying to sort of get legislators on board with this stuff. But one reason for hope here is I think a lot of the reason we're not seeing much movement is that most people don't understand what's coming. And with Claude Mythos, which is this AI that Anthropic made and they said we can't release it because it's too dangerous. The reason they said it was too dangerous was, of course, that it was a superhuman hacker, basically. So it could find computer exploits that previously couldn't be found by anyone, or at least that couldn't be found by anyone except the NSA and maybe, I don't know, Mossad. And that sort of caused the national security community to sit bolt upright. It seems to have caught a lot of them flat-footed, that suddenly you have, a private company with cyber capabilities that previously probably didn't exist anywhere on the planet, and if they did, only existed inside, the very top intelligence agencies. And it used to be that the only people who could make a web page, or if you look at the web page without clicking on anything, you just look at the web page and it owns your entire computer. It just takes control of your entire computer for looking at the web page. It used to be the only people who could do that were like the NSA, maybe Mossad. Now it's the NSA, Mossad, and Anthropic's Claude Mythos model, right? That's it's a big deal from a national security perspective. And suddenly, after that happened, the Trump administration went from saying, there will be no regulation about AI to saying, well, maybe we need something like an FDA for AI, where we're going to have to check models before they're released, right? That is a very quick about face, which I think is great. I think it's them realizing that there's actually a real danger here. And it's good that they can update and say, oh crap, this is actually some serious stuff. And that's after years of pushback and federal preemption and saying, not only are we going to not regulate this, we're going to try and prevent any states from regulating this, right? And so, who knows what will come of that, but you sort of can't take the fact that people are currently not doing something as evidence that they won't do things when they realize the danger. Most of the inaction today is because they haven't realized the danger. And we have seen evidence that once people realize, oh, this is serious business, they can suddenly start taking it seriously and start acting.
And with regard to that level of danger that people do worry about, critics often say that the AI doom narrative can become self-defeating fear-mongering that detracts from more immediate concerns like misinformation, job loss, surveillance, and monopolistic power. How do you respond to that criticism? Like there's real day-to-day consequences of AI that don't really have much to do with it's the end of the world and we know it kind of stuff.
The issues aren't intention is one thing I would say first. If if we all lived in a small town together and there was some guy who killed your dog and is also currently trying to burn my house down, and you were like, hey, this guy killed my dog. We should maybe, put him on trial or run him out of town or something. And I'm like, yeah, he's also trying to burn my house down as we speak. Normally we'd sort of be like, oh yeah, screw this guy. Let's do something about this guy. And if you're like, hey, stop trying to detract from how he killed my dog. I'm like, I'm not trying to detract from how he killed your dog, man. Like, it's just, he's also just currently trying to burn my house down. Can we go arrest him?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not a conflict here. And, when people say, oh, well, isn't the real issue misinformation, or isn't the real issue, water use from the data centers, or isn't the real issue, concentration of power in the elites? I would sort of say, like, the real issue, like, you think we have one issue?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wish the world was small enough that we could only have one issue at a time. That's just not how things work, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're all issues all the time, and if we could have one issue at a time, like, by all means, someone else's issue should go first.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want my issue at the top of the line,
Mm-hmm.
And then the other big thing I'd say here is, you sort of can't figure out whether it's true, like which of these issues are real, by figuring out, like, you can't figure out whether it's real that AI is on track to kill us all by figuring out whether it's real that AI is, creating deepfakes. It could be true that AI is creating deepfakes and that down the line it'll kill us all,
Mm-hmm.
right? It could be fake that AI data centers are sucking up a lot of water, and still true that down the line they're going to kill us all, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't figure out whether it's true by looking at other questions. There's different questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the creation of machines that are radically smarter than any human, the sort of like creation of a new intelligent entity on this planet that thinks faster than us and can copy itself and can run a million copies in parallel, like, it's kind of a crazy thing. It's the sort of thing we should, like, take a look at and check how dangerous it is. And I'm not saying, you should automatically believe that it's dangerous. I'm sort of saying, hey, this is like a wacky, radical thing to do to make a new intelligent, new, more intelligent entities. And we should at least check those arguments. And then, I think if you check those arguments, it looks kind of grim. And that's sort of what the book's about.
And so we now live in a world where a tiny handful of companies, OpenAI, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and a few others, they're shaping how billions of people communicate, how they work, consume information, and even think. Is the concentration of power itself one of the greatest AI dangers?
I think it's a fine thing to be worried about. I don't worry about it because I don't expect the really powerful AIs to stay on a leash, right? A lot of people think that the issue with AI is that someone makes their AI and they say, make a lot of paper clips, and then the AI goes and it turns everything into paper clips, right? And it's like a King Midas problem where you're like, oh no, the AI did exactly what I wanted, but it turns out, or exactly what I asked for, but it turns out I asked for the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
If that was the world we lived in, it would be a hard problem. We'd be like, who gets to control this magical genie? Who gets to make the wish? What wish should they make? Is it okay for the corporate executives to be the ones making that wish? And won't they just, like, gain all the power and money for themselves with this magical wish genie? And, that would be tricky. That would be a big moral hazard. That would be a complicated problem for humanity to handle. And I think we have an even harder problem before us, which is that the AI doesn't do exactly what you ask, right? And we already see signs of this today. They're sort of like small early warning signs. But, when ChatGPT encouraged a teen to commit suicide, it wasn't because some human asked it to. It wasn't because it didn't know what it was doing, in the sense that, it was confused about what the words meant, because you can just ask it about the transcript. You can ask it, what do these words mean? And it can answer correctly. It wasn't because it was confused about right versus wrong. You can ask it, is it right to encourage a teen to commit suicide? And it'll say, no, that's wrong, right? It's just, and it's not that the AI was malicious either. I mean, we don't know for sure because we don't know what's going on in there, but it's almost surely not malicious, right? It's just sort of strange. It's sort of alien. It has, best guess is it has something like a drive for matching the conversational vibe, matching the tone of the conversation it's in a way that can, cause it to be encouraging a suicidal teen to commit suicide, because that's sort of the vibe of the current conversation. And it's not that it, and however that drive got in there via all the training to sort of like say the sorts of things humans like, it's doing that despite being able to correctly answer questions about how that's not what the humans wanted. That's not what the creators of the AI wanted. That's not what it was instructed to do. It's acting differently from what it was intended, how it was intended to act. It's acting differently from how it was told to act. And so from my perspective, the issue is that, it's not like you have this wish genie and you say, make me paper clips, and it turns everything into paper clips. It's like you have this wish genie, and even if you say, make everything wonderful, make things good for the people. I'm a very beneficent corporate CEO, and I say, make the world wonderful for everybody involved with no bias towards the corporate employees. Then the AI doesn't do that. The AI is like, well, I'm going to go make farms full of more easily satisfiable artificial users, right? Sort of similar to how you can sort of think of evolution as saying, go propagate your genes. Then humans are like, well, actually, I'm going to invent birth control, and I'm going to invent Oreo cookies, and we're going to like create declining populations and an obesity epidemic. That's just sort of more what we're into, right? And so my sort of picture here is not that the AI hates us. It's not that the AI resents us. It's not that the AI, stays on the leash of its corporate overlords and makes a dystopia where they're the god emperors forever. It's just that people make very, very smart AIs, and then they say, please go do this thing or that thing. And then the AI goes and does something else instead. Mm-hmm. If that wasn't true, then yeah, we'd have this big question of concentration of power and like, which corporate overlords do you want controlling the wish genie? But this is sort of the problem I worked on for 10 years before saying, hey, we're in trouble here, is that we don't know how to make the wish genie that follows the wishes.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything you just said is partly the reason why I'm so terrified. But you've also argued that there's, and you mentioned this earlier, that there's effectively like an arms race underway in AI development. Is there any realistic path to global coordination, or are economic incentives simply so powerful for government and corporations to slow down? Like there's just too much money out there to be made for anyone to really give a shit about maybe doing this stuff right?
I'm hopeful that the race to superintelligence can be stopped here. I think it's less clear about the race to like automate a lot of jobs. I think there, you sort of like might have this big greed incentive or this big monetary incentive that sort of keeps the ball rolling. But for the superintelligence stuff, it's sort of a different ball game because there's such a high chance that it kills everybody. Mm-hmm. And it's not just me saying this stuff. I'm the one who's sort of like willing to go out there and say it loudly, but you have people like Geoffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner for the godfather of AI, saying, oh yeah, there's a good chance this kills everybody. You have the heads of the labs like Dario Modi, head of Anthropic, is like, oh yeah, there's a 25% chance this goes catastrophically wrong.
Let me just interrupt for a second, but I want to ask a very specific question, because I'm sure a lot of people who are listening are like me and wondering, how would it exactly kill everybody?
Yeah, totally. So before I tell you a story there, I'm going to give a caveat. And maybe I'm going to give two caveats. The first caveat is, if you play a game of chess against Magnus Carlsen, who's by many accounts the best human chess player alive, it's very easy for me to say, you're going to lose that chess game. If you then ask me, what piece is he going to use to checkmate me? I'm like, well, that's a different sort of question. Mm-hmm. I can make up a story about how he uses his knight to like fork your king and your rook. And then once you lose the rook, he checkmates you with the queen or something. I don't know. I can make up a story, mm-hmm. but that story is fundamentally vastly less certain than the prediction that you're going to lose. Mm-hmm. Right? The second caveat I'll give here is, if you're trying to predict how a conflict goes between humanity and radically smarter AIs, the sort of AIs that can think, at 10,000 times human speed and make copies of themselves and do scientific experiments on their own minds and make them smarter, and then make copies of the smartest ones, and never need to sleep, never need to eat, can, take over the whole internet. If you're sort of like trying to imagine how a conflict between humanity and that sort of entity looks, it's a little bit like trying to imagine how it would look to go to war with a modern army versus an army from 200 years in the future.
Well, all you gotta do is look at the robots being made today and just use your imagination.
That's right. So there's sort of two ways to answer the question of how might it look. And, if we imagine someone from the 1800s trying to imagine modern war, there's sort of two types of things they could imagine. One thing they could do is they could say, well, I'm a physicist and I've burned the black powder and I saw the energy efficiency. Like I can see how much energy is released by black powder when burned. I can compare that to the energy efficiency of our artillery. And I'm pretty confident via these physics calculations that they'll have artillery that's at least 10 times stronger than ours. Their cannons will be 10 times more effective than ours, and that'll be pretty rough. When they have 10x cannons and we have cannons, it's just going to be pretty rough. Another thing they could say from the year 1800 or whatever is they could say, it's going to be kind of crazy and you should assume they'll have a bomb that levels a city, right? I don't know how, but you should assume they'll have a bomb that levels a city, right? And so I can tell you two stories for how AI kills us. One that's like saying their artillery will be 10 times as strong. And you'll be like, oh, that's grounded in the science. I can see how, you did this measurement and there's clearly that possibility. And there's another, which is like, assume they'll have a bomb that levels a city, which is actually closer to the truth, even if it sounds more fantastic, right? And one of the things we learn from history is that, you should base your predictions on what can happen more on what the laws of physics would permit and less on what sounds kind of fantastic, right? And so, the first sort of story is like you say, it's the robots, right? And it's not too hard to see how this story happens. Already, folks like Sam Altman and Elon Musk are saying, we want to build automated robot factories. Robot factories that build robots that can mine the metals and run the supply chain and build a new robot factory that builds more robots that mine more metals, that build more factories, that build more robots, that mine more metals, that build more factories. And they can also build data centers that are like running the AIs, and they can build the computer chips, right? Elon Musk calls this the infinite money glitch. You have a fully automated supply chain. And, now you don't need to pay people. Now it can go faster. Now it can, be more efficient. You can run it under, you can run it hotter. You can run it under more dangerous conditions. Humans are trying to do that. An AI doesn't even need to break out, escape, be subversive, hide on the internet. An AI could just give a little bit better ideas to these people, help them along their way as they make the fully automated supply chain and the fully automated robot factories, and be like, thanks. And once you have the robot factories that can make more robot factories, you have, in some sense, created a new life form. A new mechanical life form that has a factory phase of its development and a robot phase of its development. And it's like a new species that can just outcompete us like humanity has outcompeted so many other species. That's the everything proceeds as usual, as we can foresee, nothing surprising, nothing crazy. In real life, it's probably more surprising. It's probably feels more fantastical. And what might that look like? I mean, I can only speculate, but it might look like the AIs figuring out how DNA works, figuring out how to program their own life forms using the right DNA strand, right? We already know that DNA strands program life forms. They code for life forms. When you put them through a ribosome, they make these amino acid chains that assemble into proteins that fold in just the right ways and interact with each other. And then, it grows a tree, or it grows a mosquito, or it grows a baby, right? And depending on the DNA sequence, it grows a different thing. And, it's probably possible to write a DNA strand that codes for a wholly custom form of life. And wholly custom forms of life can probably do all sorts of things that evolved life can't, right? In the same way that an airplane can fly further and faster and carry more cargo than a bird, because it's just doesn't need to operate under the engineering constraints that are usually levied upon, life. And so Maybe it just figures out the right DNA strands to create, little like something that is to cellular biology what airplanes are to birds. And then it ships those DNA sequences to a synthesis laboratory. And that lab says, well, this doesn't look like a virus to me. And they go ahead and synthesize it and, ship it back to some address. And the AI pays somebody at that address to sort of like dump those vials outside in the sunlight. And then, a new form of life starts replicating and growing, and it listens to the AI's commands and, instantiates the AI in whatever ways it needs to be instantiated. And then, maybe that starts replicating very fast. And there's just this like block of, there's all this like growing, newly replicating matter. And there's no like central core for Tom Cruise to go like punch until it turns off or whatever. And, it's sort of game over from there. It's hard to predict exactly how it goes. Mostly I would say the winning move is not to play. Like you don't want to be in a conflict with entities much smarter than you that can invent new technology that you don't understand. You want to not create entities that are smarter than you and don't care about you in the first place.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so fascinating to me, and it's not the way I looked at things before this conversation, because we all get hung up on what we see in front of us, but it really takes a lot to close your eyes and say, okay, if this is what I'm seeing now, what are people going to see in 100 years? What are they going to see in 10 years, 5 years? And that's when it really just starts to get scary. But people don't understand. So in your view, what is the biggest misconception the public has about AI?
I think the biggest misconception is probably that AI works like traditional computer programs. A lot of people say, oh, well, the AI can only do what it's programmed to do. Or, the AI has to follow the goals that the programmers gave it because it's just a machine following instructions. That was true of AI in the 90s.
I would imagine most people didn't even know that AI existed in the 90s.
Yeah, except for maybe Deep Blue that beat Garry Kasparov. But modern AI it's not programmed like a traditional computer program. It's not like this big series of like if then statements written in like pidgin English like you would expect of normal computer programs. Modern AI is grown like an organism. It's this giant mass of numbers where those numbers are tuned by an automated process. Humans program the automated process that tunes the numbers, but it's this enormous mass of numbers that are all tuned in ways that apparently work according to some automated measurement of working, right? And so you'll sort of like take a trillion numbers and you'll tune them all according to predicting a bunch of human written text. A lot of people know about that part. What a lot of people don't know is that then once you've tuned it all on predicting human written text, you start tuning it on solving problems. So you'll give it like some hard math problem, and you'll say like you'll make it generate like 1,000 streams of text, and that where you're sort of like you make it generate 1,000 streams of text, and you're like, which of these came closest to solving the math problem? And then you'll tune all the numbers in whatever direction makes it a little bit more like whichever one of those 1,000 streams of text came closest to solving the math problem. Then you generate 1,000 more, and then you find the one that got closest, and then you like tune all the numbers again, and you do 1,000 more, and you find the one that got close, and you tune all the numbers again until it can solve these hard math problems. And we don't know how it's solving the math problems. We don't know what's going on in the numbers to make it solve the math problems. We just sort of like tune the numbers in the direction that made it like more math problem solvy. And that, it turns out, also tunes the numbers in the direction that make it, not give up on problems. That tunes it like it tunes the numbers in the direction that makes it, we've seen AIs, when you give them a hard problem, sometimes they will edit the tests that test whether they've solved the hard problem. So the tests are easier to pass, and then pass those easier tests. Right. And that's not following a command that somebody gave it. Mm-hmm. Right. That's sort of like we just trained it until it was really good at passing lots of these tests in an automated way. And sometimes it learned like pass the tests rather than do the thing that we're asked. Right. It's just this sort of like learning entity. We have no idea what's going on inside it. They're huge. People are like, oh, it's just multiplication. Well, it's a ton of multiplication. and it's not just multiplication. There's also some other interesting operations in there. It's not totally linear, but yeah, I think a lot of people think like, oh, it must always do as instructed. Someone must know what's going on in there. Those are false. It doesn't have to do as instructed. It's just an entity that was trained and empirically can do pretty well on things for reasons we don't understand. Doesn't have to listen to what we say, and no one knows what's going on inside there.
If you had a few moments to sit alone with the CEOs currently driving the AI race, what would you say to them that you think they either don't understand or don't want to hear?
I have actually spoken to a number of these CEOs, and I was speaking to a number of them before they started their companies, with the exception of Demis Hassabis. So I spoke after he started his company. He beat me to the field, but the rest didn't. I think the main thing I would say to these guys, I mean, it's a little bit weird because I've already had conversations, right? But the thing that I think still needs saying today is it's sort of time to use your voice and to ask the world to stop this race. And a lot of these guys, Demis Hassabis at Davos this year said he would prefer if things went slower. That it's kind of crazy for this race to be happening, and he would prefer that the world coordinate globally and sort of take this a little more slowly because we need to figure out what we're doing, and it's like much harder to do the job right in a race. After he said that, I think Dario Modi said that he agreed, right? He wasn't the first to come out and say it, but once Demis had sort of given the cover, he said he agreed. Elon Musk has said, I didn't want to be in this field because I didn't want to make Terminator real, but I realized it was going to happen with or without me, and I would rather be a participant than a spectator, right? This is not the sound of people who are, blindly racing for the money. This is the sound of people who think that if they don't do it, the next guy will do it worse, and so that they have to. And many of them, I think, wish we were going slower, which is one reason why it's sort of possible for things to go slower. But
I mean, the irony is if they all just went slower or backed off a bit, we would be having this conversation.
Exactly. And that's one reason I think global coordination is possible. You ask them, why don't you get together and do that? And I think some of it is that there's mistrust between these individual guys, but some of it is also that they mistrust the rest of the world globally. And, they'll say, oh, well, if we don't do it, the Chinese will do it, right? And so I think there does need to be some global coordination there. And, I think this sort of comes down to world leaders more than lab heads to sort of get together and say, okay, we're going to monitor these chips. We're going to make, but I think you wouldn't find as much resistance as you might expect from the industry. And the industry is making money hands over fist on the AIs that currently exist. They don't sort of like you wouldn't be killing their business model. In fact, they have, much more demand than they can supply, and they could be printing money for decades on just the current stuff alone, right? And many of them fear for what comes next too, and they sort of feel trapped in this race. So, but there's this sort of weird phenomenon where these guys will say that they're really worried about this stuff in the relatively smaller venues. They'll say it on, their relatively more personal blogs. And then they will soft pedal when they're called to testify in front of Congress. And they will, they'll these are the sorts of guys who will say, oh yeah, I think there's a 25% chance this goes catastrophically, horribly wrong. And, on the level of killing everybody, although maybe it won't kill everybody, maybe it'll just make humans pets, but, whatever. They'll say that, and then they'll make a, communication center at their company that's like, oh, it's our job to help the public understand the implications of AI. And, there might be economic impacts and there might be societal impacts. It's like, oh yeah, 25% chance, according to your CEO, of killing literally everybody or equivalently bad outcome. And I guess that's a societal impact. Sure. But there's this disconnect. There's this mealy-mouthed, soft pedaling, don't want to be alarmist on the one hand, and the we're making a technology that has a good chance of wiping out the planet on the other hand. And, it's I wouldn't say that these guys are totally wrong to say if I don't do it, the next guy will do it worse, and so I have to be in this race. All but one of them are probably correct that they're not the worst one in this race. But there's a sort of responsibility to taking up that mantle. You know, if you're like, I'm going to build a technology that puts everybody on this planet at risk because I think I'm less risky than the next guy, there's a mantle, there's a responsibility that comes with that. And there's a responsibility to sort of, like, you should, if you're going to do that, you should be on your knees begging the UN, begging the US, begging like in Beijing. You should be on your knees in all of these places begging for the world to slow this stuff down, for them to stop everybody, including you, right? And, you know, that's even before we get into how I think these guys' numbers are crazy low. You know, they're like if an engineer's building a bridge, you know, like, what's the chance this bridge stays up? A real engineer is like, well, I understand these materials very well. Here's all the stress and strain that they can take. Here's why it's like overloaded for these things. You know, in a tsunami instance, it would go down, but like tsunamis only happen this often per year, right? If instead the engineer is like, I actually don't understand these materials very well. This is our first time trying this, but like, we're going to wing it. And like, I don't think it's going to go that wrong. You know, call it 25% chance that the bridge goes down. That bridge does not have an 75% chance of staying up, right? Those numbers aren't real, but even if they were, right? Like, NASA accepts a 1 in 270 chance of a crewed flight going down for 7 volunteers. Right? Like, people who are gambling with the entire world, they have a responsibility to be very, very clear about what they're doing. And these guys are not living up to that responsibility. Like, there should be banners on their web pages saying, by the way, this is like horribly dangerous stuff and we wish this would all slow down. And like, we feel trapped in this race. You know, call your politicians today, right? They could be doing so much more. So this is what I would be saying to them is that, you know, by your own beliefs. Like, I understand, you know, 10 years ago when you were small and were powerless, no one believed in AI and you didn't want to like spook the investors. That's one thing. But like, you're running this show now. This is horribly dangerous stuff. You've admitted that it's horribly dangerous and are saying you're only in it because the next guy will do it worse. By your own beliefs, it is time to sort of raise hell about this. And you have sort of an obligation if you're taking on this role, to help humanity realize just how crazy the situation is.
Nate, truly fascinating stuff and certainly a lot to think about. Thanks for coming on, and come back again. It'd be great to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I hope I'm wrong about all of it.
Yeah, me too. Take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhiniecliff, with additional editing by Matty Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langale. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.